September 9th, 1943. Dawn breaks over the Gulf of Salerno. The water is glass still, reflecting the pale Italian sky like a mirror waiting to shatter. Along the beaches of Paestum and the tobacco fields south of the Selle River, German field commanders peer through their binoculars at the dark silhouettes gathering on the horizon. Steel mountains rising from the Mediterranean. The invasion fleet has arrived. General Major Rudolf Sickenius, commanding the 16th Panzer Division, counts the vessels and feels a cold certainty settle in his chest. This will not be Sicily again. This will be something else entirely. The Allied landings at Salerno were meant to unlock the Italian peninsula, a dagger thrust toward Rome, while the British 8th Army pushed up from Calabria. But the Germans knew it was coming. Field Marshal Albert Kesselring had positioned his divisions with ruthless efficiency across the coastal plains, transforming every grove and stone farmhouse into a fortress. The Americans of the 6th Corps would wade ashore into hell itself, machine gun nests arranged like teeth in a steel jaw. What the Germans did not anticipate, what no amount of tactical preparation could account for, was the weight of fire that would descend from those ships on the horizon. At 0330 hours, the naval bombardment began. German officers, veterans of the Eastern Front who had survived Stalingrad's frozen abattoir and the endless steppes where entire armies vanished, had never experienced anything like this. The cruisers USS Philadelphia, USS Savannah, and HMS Uganda opened fire with their 6-inch guns. Destroyers added their voices to the symphony. But it was the battleships that rewrote the rules of land warfare. USS Texas and HMS Warspite, steel leviathans mounting 14 and 15-inch rifles, turned the coastal defenses into a landscape from Dante. Each shell weighed as much as a small automobile. When they struck Earth, they excavated craters deep enough to swallow a panzer whole. The precision was what stunned them. German doctrine had always respected American industrial capacity. Everyone knew the factories of Detroit could drown Europe in steel. But this was different. This was science made manifest. The Americans had deployed naval fire control officers directly with their forward infantry units, men who could call down apocalypse with a radio handset. When a German counterattack formed up near the tobacco warehouse at Persano, shells arrived within 90 seconds, bracketing the assembly point with surgical accuracy. Trees became splinters, stone walls became dust. Panzers, those feared predators of the European battlefield, were flipped onto their backs like toys. Captain Freiherr von Liebenstein, operations officer of the 16th Panzer Division, would later write in his after-action report, "The enemy's naval gunfire was of a weight and accuracy we had never before encountered. Our positions, carefully prepared and camouflaged, were obliterated with what appeared to be scientific precision. It was not bombardment, it was execution." The German soldiers had expected the Americans to fight like the British, brave certainly, tenacious in defense, but cautious in attack, married to their tea schedules and regimental traditions. They had expected the logistical abundance they'd heard rumors about, the endless trucks and canned food and cigarettes that seemed to flow from an inexhaustible source. What they had not expected was this marriage of overwhelming material superiority and cold, calculated application of mathematics. Every shell was a theorem. Every salvo was proof. On September 13th, when General Heinrich Wiedinghoff launched his great counterattack aimed at splitting the beachhead and driving the Allies back into the sea, the naval guns became the anvil upon which the offensive shattered. The USS Philadelphia alone fired over 1,200 rounds in sustained fire missions. Soldiers of the Hermann Goering Panzer Division, advancing through the morning mist toward the Selle-Calor corridor, watched their comrades simply disappear. Not retreat, not fall wounded, but atomized by the 15-inch shells that fell among them like the fist of an angry god. A German NCO captured near Altavilla told his interrogators something that would appear in American intelligence summaries. "We were told the Americans were soft, that they needed their comforts and would break easily. But those ships did not care about comfort.
They cared about nothing except mathematics and death. The symbolic weight of those guns echoed far beyond Salerno. Throughout the war, German generals had relied on tactical brilliance and the fighting spirit of their soldiers to overcome material disadvantages. But there is a point where quantity becomes quality, where abundance transforms into a form of violence that cannot be countered by courage or cunning. The Americans had found that threshold. They had industrialized destruction, made it repeatable, teachable, as reliable as a factory production line.
By September 16th, when the crisis at Salerno finally broke and the beach had stabilized, the German withdrawal began. Not a rout, never that. German units retained their discipline even in retreat, but a recognition. Kesselring himself would later observe that the naval gunfire support had been the decisive factor, more significant than the tanks or aircraft or the number of infantry divisions. The shells kept coming with a rhythm that broke men's minds before it broke their bodies. The guns of Salerno spoke a language older than ideology, older than flags and anthems. They spoke the language of industrial democracy, of a nation that could turn its peacetime genius for production into a wartime engine of such totality that it rewrote the calculus of battle. Every shell represented not just explosive force, but the accumulated labor of miners and steelworkers, of engineers and mathematicians, of a society that had chosen to defend certain principles with the full weight of its economic might. In the end, it was not propaganda that shocked the German generals. It was precision. It was the realization that they were fighting an enemy who had transformed war from an art into a science, and who possessed the resources to apply that science without limit, without exhaustion, without mercy. The thunder over Salerno was not just sound. It was the future arriving, shell by shell, with perfect, terrible accuracy.